morning and welcome to this latest Indica Books Writers Workshop with Otis. Today is the 27th of August, 2023. And without further ado, the floor is yours, Otis.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have two pieces today, and since they're both relatively short, I was hoping to sort of have a maybe a wider discussion, but there are very few of us. So I have pieces from Ram and Sritran, and Sritran is supposedly going to join us in a little bit. So hopefully that will coordinate well. In the meantime, we're going to put all of our attention onto Ram and his piece. And Ram, what I was thinking was, the piece is short enough. I thought maybe you could read the entire thing. It reads quite well, and I thought it would be great for us to hear it. And then Abhinav, in the meantime, you listen carefully. I'm basically gonna go like this. So like when Ram reads the piece, I'm gonna ask him first, like, what does he think? Because it's actually, I think it's really interesting that when we write a piece, we can feel one way about it, but when we read it out loud, we can think differently about it. Yeah. And I think it's a great, exactly. It's a way that we can actually be kind of a different person. There's a person that is the writer that writes the material, and I know that person for me always loves what I write. I mean, they just love it. So, I mean, we have to. So the writer must love what they write and the process of that. But the person who reads out loud is a little bit different, and they have a slightly different stance. And so it's almost like having two minds. And that can be very helpful for us. I don't like to have that other mind really be part of it, because I love that sort of the love fest that I have with my own writing. But it can be valuable. And then also Abhinav, I'll have you, like, based on your ear and your hearing, like, what do you think? And then I'll also chime in with that. Oh, look at that, Ram. Wonderful. Okay.
Cool, Ram.
You're here twice.
Yeah.
Recording.
That's what I was worried about, feedback. That's the danger.
I have muted the other Ram. So,
yeah.
Do you want to log off the other account you have, the other device?
No problem. You won't get the disturbance.
Okay.
That's a difficulty with the power of bilocation, is that we get a feedback. But you solved it, so excellent.
Yeah. Right. So should I start reading?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is titled Ice in the Tiffin Box. I'll give the background later. Let me first read it. Shravani grabbed Adi's hand and dragged him into the living room. She looked up at the clock. 10 minutes past 8:30. Shit. She shoved a packet of Jim Jam biscuits and a banana into Adi's hand. Eat it in the car. Grabbing her handbag and Adi's school bag, she raced out the door, pulling Adi behind her. If she drove fast enough, she could reach the school by 9, just as the morning assembly ended. In the car, Adi rolled down the passenger window and rested his chin on the frame. The packet of biscuits and banana lay on his lap, untouched. They stopped at another red light. Shravani looked at her watch once more. She pressed the accelerator pedal again and again, revving the engine. She drummed her fingers on the stick, waiting for the traffic light to turn green. Her stomach growled. Didi, I have not eaten in 3 days. Give me something. The voice startled Shravani. A scrawny girl, not much older than Adi, leaned on her side of the door begging. The girl's face was caked black with dirt. Her dress was threadbare, stained with dirt, and of an unrecognizable color. Go away, I have nothing to give you, Shravani said, dismissing the girl with a wave of her hand. Please, Didi, please, I have not eaten, Didi. God will bless you and your son. Please give me something, Didi. 5 rupees at least. The girl thrust a grubby palm through the open window and nudged Shravani's arm. Shravani looked down. A faint brown stain marked the white sleeve of her kurta. The pest? Shoo, go away. Shravani rolled the window up a notch and jogged the knob, threatening to roll it all the way up. The girl became more insistent. Please, Didi. Shravani looked at the traffic light. It would turn green any time now. Arey? I said, go away, no? At least give me that biscuit packet and banana. The girl thrust her arm into the car, trying to reach across Shravan and grab the eatables. The stench of stale sweat filled the car. The vehicles around started revving in anticipation of the light turning green. Shravani grabbed the scrawny arm, pushed it out the window. The girl staggered, tripped, and fell backward. Shravani glared at the girl. The girl picked up a handful of dirt and raised her arm to throw it at Shravani, uttering a curse. What are you glaring at like that? I'll pull out your eyes, the girl screamed. Shravani shook a finger in warning. The traffic light turned green and Shravani eased the car forward. Shravani glanced into the side mirror. The girl was running after the car. Shravani pulled up Adi back and rolled up both their windows. Traffic was still crawling and the girl caught up. She banged on the window. How dare you push me? Your son. Shravani revved the engine a bit. The girl running alongside the car shook a finger. North Point School. That's where he studies, no? I also know where you live. I know everything. See what I do to you now. Shravani saw a gap in the traffic and sped into it. The girl jumped back just in time.
Okay, great, thank you. So what do you think reading it out loud? What are the things that you like about it? Let's start with that.
Yeah. So when I read it in my mind and when I read it out aloud, the feeling that I get is very different. The first thing is that when I read it in my mind without reading it aloud, it feels like there is a very rapid action that is happening. There is something that's happening all the time. There's action and there is movement. When I read it, maybe because I'm very familiar with the story, because I have written it, I have edited it multiple times, it didn't have the same impact. It didn't have the same impact. But one thing I was happy with it when I wrote, and also looking at your feedback, is that I think I have managed to maintain the point of view consistent almost throughout. So that I was very, very happy with, because when I write, I always have that thing in my mind that, okay, is the POV consistent? Is the POV consistent? But in this, I think I have managed to maintain that, except maybe in a couple of places. So that is something that I liked. Now this is only 800 word sample, and this is part of a 11,000 word story that I have written, and this is the second page. So when I read it in isolation, I get the sense that yes, there is something happening. There is a lot happening. There is constant movement, constant action, and there is also a sense of the protagonist and probably the antagonist. But if I were to read only this much, will it make me want to read the next page? I am not so sure.
And I wonder why that might be. So maybe we'll try and get to that. I mean, I have some ideas about that. Abhinav, I'm sorry, Abhinav, I want to apologize. I thought that I was sharing my screen, so I was going through so you could read along. But
I was following along pretty well. It was,
Well, that's great.
But yeah, okay. I am going to take a look at your notes now.
So just in hindsight a little bit, maybe that the sense of what this story is about, I think that is not probably getting revealed. I mean, if it is 11,000 word story, I think in the first maybe about 1,000 words, the reader needs to get a sense of what this story is about. That I'm not sure if that is coming through. I mean, I'm very close to the story because I know what happens. When I started writing, I knew what would happen. So maybe I did not see that, but when I read this in isolation, which is why I didn't want to send the first page, I wanted to share only the second page, the second and the third pages, so that this piece in isolation is that something that's exciting enough, because if I'm standing in a bookstore, I open a random page and maybe that page is this. So if I read this, would I buy this book? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, as I hear this story, I think the answer is kind of maybe. I think that what you've done here is you've certainly established a protagonist and an antagonist. So I think that those two things exist, and so we do have a perceivable conflict, right? Essentially, this woman wants to take her child to school, and this woman who's on the street is preventing her from doing that, right? That singular task. I'm wondering if I feel like it's a protagonist and antagonist that are simply presented as stereotypes and don't reach me in a more significant way. Like I feel like I'm watching, yes, I feel like I'm watching a fight in a sense, a conflict. I may even wonder what's going to happen if I'm interested in that conflict, right? So, I mean, this is sort of like, you know, we like a sporting event, you know, it's like, do I have a team here? Is my team either, you know, this woman who's trying to get her kid to school, or is my team this woman who's preventing them from getting to school, who's living on the street, we might assume. That then my interest, like in a sporting event, is actually coming from me, right? It's not something that's being evoked by you. You're not grabbing me by drawing me into something grander. You're not making me a fan. You're not making me feel as if this is necessarily relevant. And so that, to me, that becomes very interesting for us to think about, because none of us think of ourselves as a stereotype, right? Because I mean, it's not even that we think of ourselves really, but we just simply are not a stereotype. We are a complete, you know, we're a complex individual that we generally don't even think about. Yeah, Abhinav.
So that's an interesting point you made, Otis. Why do you say that we are, you know, unable to get into the story, and the other point about stereotypes? So do you mean stereotypes for both the characters, the girl and Shravani? Both are you saying that both come off as somewhat stereotypical?
Yeah, I am. This story reminds me of a story that I often tell. Someday the graduate student that I taught will find me and reprimand me for telling this story about them all the time. But anyway, I made this point in a graduate workshop by way of example. So I had a graduate student. He wrote about a character who worked at a liquor store. He was essentially a misanthrope, right? So he, you know, when we're in his consciousness, he's, you know, degrading all of humanity, right? And in walks, you know, this couple walk into the liquor store and they're horrible. So basically his position, his singular, I mean, he's presented somewhat as a stereotype. He's a stereotypical misanthrope. He has no depth to him, really. And then in walks a couple who are essentially horrible, confirming his stereotypical position on them. This is not what we do, basically. We don't want to confirm the beliefs of everyone. You know, this is a woman who's driving. She's feeling harassed by this woman who's asking for, you know, for something to eat. And then it's confirmed for her that this woman is actually horrible, because when she doesn't get what she wants to eat, she's going to curse them and track them and destroy their lives. I'm not getting a depth on either side, really. We want to confront. So even our misanthrope arrives at being a misanthrope. A hatred of humanity is not a given, and humanity is not somehow worthy of that hatred. This is not a truism, but what's being presented in the story is that it is a truism. We don't get into why this character is misanthropic. Misanthropic, is that, misanthrope. Yeah, so I have the right word. Yeah, so we're not getting into the depth, right? So we're not really putting the full humanity of either of those characters onto the page. The people who walk in are not horrible. They need to confront and antagonize this character's position. That's a little bit of what we have here. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
So if they are stereotypical, then would it help if that part was dealt in like, literally like a few sentences, half a page maybe?
No.
This may go on for more than a page or two.
Can I preempt you there, Abhinav? So, like I said, this
Yes,
is the
Ram, go ahead.
third page. This is the third page of this story, and I intentionally sent the third page because I wanted to see how it reads. So, if time permits, I could share my screen of the first two pages and read it, if time permits and if it is okay, because I have tried to cover that in the first two pages.
Okay. You may not want to. Right. Well, what you want to do, I think. So, I mean, there aren't laws, although Hollywood will tell you that there were. But we simply want to allow the space. So
sure.
It doesn't need to be 2 pages. We don't need to do 2 pages of character summary or anything like that. In Hollywood, for the protagonist, they talk about save the cat, right? I'm not a fan of writing fiction, according to some kind of robotic plan, right? But I understand why someone has suggested that. So with Save the Cat, what happens is the protagonist saves a cat, right? Does something that demonstrates their compassion for a wider humanity, even if they're somewhat a despicable character, right? Because our protagonist is the character who has to change. So they have the problem, not the world. The world, the antagonistic force of the world, is the teacher of the protagonist. No matter how horrible that antagonistic world is, they sort of like me in this workshop, right? I'm the teacher. I'm the grand antagonist. No matter how horrible I am, basically it's for the purpose of taking the protagonist and having them be finally transformed. That they're going to be transformed means that they have some kind of issue here in the beginning, right? So they're not perfect. We understand that. But they do have, they have this interior self that might be clouded with their stereotypical, performance of self, but they have something in them that is humane. And we get to witness that in the Save the Cat moment. Having the Save the Cat moment inspires a sympathetic resonance between the protagonist, who has a problem, and we objectify as having a problem, and our own interior self, because we don't see ourselves as having a problem, right? So now we have a sympathetic resonance with that character. It doesn't have to be long. I mean, watch any Pixar movie. If you want to see demonstrations of this, watch. I mean, I have kids, so I have to watch all the Pixar movies, right? Watch Storks. Watch Storks. I'll just put it up there. You will see classic Save the Cat. I mean, they don't even bother to try and hide it at all. They honestly have a cat hanging from a tree. Not exactly, but pretty close. So we need to so we can just think of that as like a little bit of air into the character. We can see inside them, right? We can see their heart, not just their jaded exterior. Then we have to think about the antagonist. So right now we have the antagonist. She has a grubby hand. She stinks of sweat, right? Like everything I'm getting about her is just a stereotype. I'm not seeing her humanity at all. I'm seeing a person who is, sort of stripped of their humanity by whatever it is, economic forces or whatever you might might say, but I don't get any indication that she's even been stripped of her humanity by that. It's simply a kind of truism of her, right? So I'm only getting that one dimensionality. And then on top of that, she absolutely fulfills what I would expect her to fulfill, which is when she doesn't get what she wants, she's going to destroy the life of this woman. That doesn't seem right, you know? I mean, basically we have our protagonist, she drives, she gets stopped by this woman who's a problem, and then that woman confirms that she is a problem, right?
Okay.
I mean, so we just have to do better than that. It can be, I would be careful of the descriptions of that woman. So this is, I mean, I feel quite informed by my reading of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad that takes place in the Belgian Congo. So the narrator is Marlowe. He's British, he's white. He travels to the Congo. And there's a certain section in which he describes the Africans that he sees. His descriptions of those Africans for a white audience seem fine. But they're stereotyped. They're derogatory, right? The descriptions, the language of it, right? But no one in England even notices that. In fact, that book, I think it was written in Albanov will know, 1906. You know, that was a joke. I don't think anyone knows when Heart of Darkness was written, but it's around that time, 1900s. So, no one knew that then. And then within the Western canon, right? I mean, I think it's interesting to think about this. Within the Western canon, also no one noticed that until, I forget his first name, but Achebe basically wrote a criticism of Heart of Darkness. I'm not sure when that was, in the 60s, maybe, that basically pointed out the racism in Heart of Darkness. We could call it a tacit racism, and we could even say that the work as a whole is trying to expose some kind of racism or make a commentary on it, but still racism is embedded in it. I taught Joseph Conrad. I taught Heart of Darkness for many years in high school, and at a certain point, I had to recognize that that in teaching it, the experience of the book was different for different students. I had to take that knowledge in, right? I had to be like, yeah.
Apocalypse Now based on Heart of Darkness? Sunil here.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But it was probably transposed to Vietnam or someplace.
Yeah, that's what occurred. But the reading the Achebe essay on Heart of Darkness, I think is really illustrative. It's a really, really good essay, and it changed the way I thought about that work and the way I thought about work in general. And so it makes me very sensitive, to the ways we can depict stereotypes.
So I have a question here, Otis.
And wait, let me finish.
Sure.
And that we as writers have a tremendous responsibility to investigate our own essential biases, right? So that we don't propagate stereotypes. Someone was going to ask a question, and Ram had his hand up.
Yeah. So I have a question here. So in this story that I have written, it is written from the first person point of view, but it is a close first person where I am writing from the point of view of the protagonist. Now, the description of the beggar girl that is given, because I am trying to stick to the point of view of the protagonist, I have tried to describe it the way she would see, and the way she sees is stereotypical. And that is reflected in that. So
Okay,
how does
so
one handle a situation like that?
this is a very, very, now you're really getting into the kind of way I like to look at language, Ram. Okay, let's look specifically at, so we have to understand that when we're writing something, even when we're writing something in a close point of view, we actually have information in there that is objective, and when we indicate it is that it's subjective. So if we want it to be subjective, we have to make sure that we make it subjective and not objective. This is, I don't really remember the Achebe essay on Heart of Darkness, but I think that this is sort of the realm where it starts to get to. So like, even, so let me, I'm going to go right here. So this is actually going to deal with how Shravani is actually depicted as a stereotype. So I'm going to do her first, just because I see it right in front of me. Go away, I have nothing to give you, Shravani said, dismissing the girl with the wave of her hand. Okay, so dismissing the girl with the wave of her hand is an objective description by the narrator, who is not the character, of what Shravani is doing. So Shravani is basically being depicted objectively as being dismissive. That is only one, I mean, I might argue that that's only one side of her emotion. I'm sure another side of her emotion is not dismissive at all, that it pains her to be approached by somebody else, a human being who's in need, and then she feels a sense of compassion for her, but I'm only getting one side. So in a sense, she's being stereotyped as being one-sided. It's a very subtle argument, I understand. Let me, sticking with Shravani for a second in terms of being stereotyped, right? Shravani looked down. A faint brown stain marked the white sleeve of her kurta, the pest, right? So that's her thought, right? But it's coming to us through the narrator. And so it's this absolutely objective thing. All she's thinking is the pest. It is a one-dimensional response to what's happened. I'm just suggesting that we, so like to me, and you see I cut that, I would dial back from that. I would not represent Shravani as so one-dimensional myself, because I want to allow a greater complexity for her. I don't want her to be a person who is, someone touches her and she thinks of that person, that they're like an insect, a pest, right? That's a rather large position to take. Let's see. I was looking for the grubby hand that came in. I could hear it again, when you read it. But anyway, so to describe her hand as grubby, right? That is a pejorative term. Yes. And that's coming from the author, right?
I use it intentionally. It was used very intentionally.
Right. Well, that could be, but it's not clear. It's not clear that this is the perception of the character. Instead, it seems like it is the objective opinion of the author, of the narrator. So you see, the narrator, we have to understand that in the text all the time, every word belongs to the narrator, because the narrator decides everything. The narrator needs to be careful about how they attribute that information. Like for me, I would say, I would write it like this, because I want to lead the reader very carefully. I would say the woman thrust her hand through the window. It was dirty. Shravani thought grubby. Right? Like I want to distinguish between it's dirty and then it's grubby.
Got it.
Like those have different connotations. And I do not want to have my narrator be a person who is judging. I want them to actually use objective information, neutral words, basically, not words that are either pejorative or what's the other one? The opposite of pejorative. I don't want my narrator. What is it?
Laudatory.
Laudatory. Yeah, I've never said laudatory in my life, so maybe that's the word. But anyway, neither pejorative nor laudatory. I don't want either of that for my narrator because that's not my narrator's business. So I always want to distinguish between the two.
So essentially, you're saying, Otis, that's something like
can I say something? Can I add something?
dirty.
Sorry, Abhinav, sorry to cut you. I really have to say this. So, Otis, this is like really phenomenal. So, I didn't get that. I didn't get this very fine distinction when I wrote it and when I read it also, because I used those very strong adjectives with a very particular intent that I wanted the feeling to come that yes, this is how the protagonist is looking at that girl. But when you said that it comes out not as what the protagonist feels, but as the narrators, then it made a lot of sense. So instead of saying that the girl put her grubby hand, maybe I could change it to the girl put her hand and Shravani said that take your grubby hand out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the character can engage in whatever bias they want to.
Right.
I am just suggesting that if we really want to connect with our reader, we do not want to have any bias. Because we do not, so to me, it's actually kind of fascinating when we have a narrator who expresses bias, right, which is judgment, right? So let's call it judgment, whether it's positive judgment or negative judgment, it doesn't matter. When we have a narrator that expresses judgment, even if the reader agrees with that judgment, which I don't think that that's a positive thing either necessarily, but if they agree with that judgment, they still are more distant because what we really want is we want to involve ourselves with a consciousness that is non-judgmental. That is the safest place for the reader to be. We can accept that the characters are judgmental, but we do not want the consciousness that we come into to be judgmental. Because what if that consciousness judges us? Right? What if the narrative consciousness suddenly turns around and you, reader, you're as despicable and disgusting as this woman is? What if that happened? And then I'd be like, oh my God, I had no idea that I was going to be suddenly, I'm being involved in this space, but suddenly I'm going to be raked over the coals. That's not safe. The narrative consciousness, by being objective and not judgmental, is a safe space for the reader to enter into where they can explore then their own foibles and their own uncomfortable feelings about themselves, which we all have. I mean, we're putting aside the most pious among us, right? Sorry.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm like hogging a lot of airtime, but so can I dumb this down and say that it is?
I wouldn't put it dumb it down. It's not dumb it down, Ram. Talk about judgmental. Wow.
No, of course.
Holy smokes.
Can I say that it is probably preferable to have the narrator stick only to action and description and not judgment, and have the characters do the judgmental things. The judgment has to come from the character.
Right. Well, and it's also why we tend to favor our narrator showing, not telling. So, like, let me give you this. The girl became more insistent. Well, I could also see that being written, the girl became more desperate. right? You know, insistent is like aggressive. Desperate is like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I don't get this food. So I can see it going both ways. I would prefer to, you know, and you'll notice that what I did, look, we'll look right at this. Look what I did. I mean, my God, I'm amazing. Let's put it that way. Let's be a little bit more laudatory about me. Okay. You wrote the girl became more insistent. I wrote the girl said, please,
Yes.
Dee Dee. So I'm not saying whether she's desperate or insistent. I'm not saying it. And Ram, not to twist the knife, but that's not dumbing it down. That's smartening it
I'm
up.
sorry. I didn't mean dumbing down the narrative, but I just what you said. I'm just trying to put it in the form of a simple sentence as a guideline.
Yeah. Okay. However, you have to have your guidelines. That's your subjective territory. So not for me to say. But so there are indications in here already. So we have you know, Shravani is basically, she thinks things like the pest, right? So, and she, you know, and she, I mean, she could wave her hand, but if we cut out the pest, then she's waving her hand. And it's up for the reader to interpret what it might mean, right? Rather than adding the pest, which begins to stereotype her. And then the girl became more insistent. So she becomes, when she doesn't get what she wants, she's more aggressive. And then finally that leads to her cursing the woman and saying, I'm going to track you down and ruin your life. I mean, this is now not a person who's desperate and humane. They're actually vindictive and they are aggressive just in the way that Shravani thinks that they are going to be. So this confirms the stereotypical expectation of both Shravani and, in a sense, maybe the reader, if they should adhere to these things. So it confirms our stereotypical expectations. And we do not want to write things, I believe, that confirm our stereotypes. We want to confound our stereotypes. I think that's my objective. So, you know, I would be careful if I were Joseph Conrad, right? I would be careful to show the humanity of the Africans that are around him that he's describing, rather than to dehumanize them.
Yeah,
which is the, you know, that's what stereotyping is, right? Stereotyping is dehumanizing. And I think we all understand why we want to be very beware of dehumanizing others, because that also then leads to various kinds of violences, right? Not only, so I think dehumanization is the first, you know, that's the first, that's language violence that then opens the gate towards physical violence. And they're really, to me, they're very seamless. They're not really separate things. You know, the adage, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. That's a total lie, right? I mean, words hurt you. It's words that hurt you first, actually. And then it's words lead to the sticks and stones. So let's have that be clear. But yeah, I think that, you know, like Ram, we've been working on stuff for a long time. And what I really do appreciate is that you really do have these two characters here. You could, if you want to give, you know, if you want to really highlight more of Shravani's biases, right? You can go more, you can be closer in her point of view. And so this is a thing that I've talked about many times before, basically creating, you know, we can call it like a sandwich, right? Or an onion. When I will typically go, you know, I'll use sensory perception, which is objective, but I'll use that to get into the mind of the character. Once we're in the mind of the character, they can think whatever they want. I want to be careful about showing that what they think is different than what is objective reality. It's what they think. So I might say, she saw the woman coming close to her. As she approached, she even smelled the stink of sweat. She reached in the car, and Shravani noticed how dirty her hand was. Grubby, she thought. Another beggar woman coming to get something for nothing, right? So you see how I saw her, she smelled her hand reached in, it was dirty. I'm just differentiating between the dirt, which is objective, and the grubby, she thought. And now that I'm in her thoughts, I say, another beggar looking for a free ride, right? If you can perceive how that's an onion going in through these sensory perceptions and into the heart, which is the thoughts. And then to me, it goes further than that, because our thoughts and then finally our heart. Her heart beat quickly, right? Now I'm getting another beggar looking for nothing. Her heart thumped against her chest. Because now I know that what that means is that she's scared. So she has her biased thoughts, and it makes her frightened. And now we can come out of it. Get away from my car. Do you want me to run you down? Shravani said. That's how I try to do it. I take very careful care of this. I mean, you know, some might argue that I take too much. and my lack of production, you know, demonstrates it. But I'm also, because I have these, I do seriously have very strict, I mean, I consider ethic, it's my ethics, my writer's ethics. I have a collection of writer's ethics, and I've been applying them for a long time. And because of that, I really have internalized this sense of creating a dual consciousness between the narrator, who has one kind of consciousness and is one way, and I am very, very serious about that, and then the consciousness of my characters, who I allow their problems and their biases and all of that. But I also know essentially that is that's my palette. That's exactly what I'm attacking and discussing in my work. Essentially, human perception.
Okay, quick time check. Otis, do you want to move to the second one?
Thank you very much.
Sharon's piece.
This is like amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the work too. You're doing the work too. I mean, and I want you to understand too, please, that it's like these you know, however you want to talk about the growing pains or whatever they are, you know, you're doing great, because it's not that I'm not saying that you do not perceive these characters as human beings or other people as human beings. You do, clearly. It's a question of, it's easier not to do it, and it's harder to do it, but I know you want to. I know we all want to. We want to put complete, full characters on the page. We want to represent reality. There is no reality of stereotypes. Stereotypes don't exist. So that's... Writing stereotypes is writing a false reality, and I know none of us want to be doing that. So then we just have to figure out how to get, it's not that we don't see people as full human beings, we do, but now we have to find the words that are able to express that full humanity on the page. And that's just hard. And some of it is style, and some of it I do think are these techniques that I'm trying to share with you.
Very true.
Let's see if I can do this. I can't. Why are you doing this to me? Okay, I have to change. Oh, no, I got it. Thank you. Okay, Sri Tran, I don't think you were here right at the very beginning, but because we only had two pieces, they're both quite short. I thought Ram read his all the way through, and I thought that you might read yours all the way through. And the thing, my first proposition was that when we read our work aloud, we kind of become a different person in relationship to our work. We don't tend to like to do it because the person that we are that writes it just loves our work so much. And this person might have a few more difficulties, but I thought you might read it and then talk to me about, talk to us all about what you found in reading it, and then we would chime in too. So I'll have you read the entire thing.
Entire thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. The shutters of the window moved lightly as a small wisp of air entered the room. The air crept slowly along the patchwork wall, first to the pickle jars and the shelves, and curving along the wall to the wrinkled saris and shirt sleeves. It carried the coldness of the winter with it, making the sleepers in the house let out a small whimper. The air stopped its mischief briefly to look at the mother and the son, sharing a decade-old patchy blanket on the stone floor. The first rays of the light rushed in through the gaps of the shutter the air had made in its path, but they did not bring colors with them. The house was mostly a brownish gob of mud and stone. The air ran to the boy's ear and whistled, but he only turned to the other side to have that ear covered. It shifted its strategy and scratched him on his foot, hoping to shake him with its coldness, but the boy pulled the blanket entirely off his mother and wrapped himself in it. This must have startled his mother, for she woke up immediately and went up. She left the door open wide, and the light flooded in, intensifying the brownish hues of the house. The air bathed in the light too, as it washed off the dust, stench, and the silence of the night it carried. The songs of the dawn passed gently and filled it with myriad vibrations. The air recognized the song of the nightingale and that of the blue jay. It recognized the faint hum of the bees and the vanishing hoots of the cold. It recognized the other things that passed through it. The very slight greenish breath of the newborn leaves, the bluish fragrance of the dew, and the red-hot aura of the morning fire. Color, sound, and smell mixed with each other in the air. To humans, there might be different experiences of the senses, but to the air they are all one. Yet it still managed to differentiate them. The air wanted for the boy to wake up from the depths of the blissful sleep. It remembered the serenity of the dream world vividly, devoid of both beauty and crookedness of the real world. Not unlike the abode of the death it had visited. The air missed those feelings now. Hunger, thirst, pain, and sleep are the friends or enemies of the living. The air had long left its physical body, and thus had shed its relationships away with the living world. Did I too? The air thought. I am neither alive nor dead. O Lord of the world and O Father of the orphans. They recognized the voice of the woman who had been its wife in the past life. The notes of the song rushed in through the open door and danced around the air as they echoed off the walls of the house. It glided around, leaving the boy to dream and to appreciate the voice and the beauty of its wife again. Make me the lotus flower at thy feet. There observed its wife keenly for the first time since it had left the abode of the dead. Wrinkles tore into her face, aging the 35-year-old to a grown. Her hair had dropped, and what used to be tied into a thick bun now was not unlike dried wood. Her eyes withered too, going deeper and deeper into the sockets, as if to hide themselves from the evil of ever-haunting hunger. What had been a glowing and robust structure in the living days of the air now faded into a thin skeleton with skin sagging, freeing from the shackles of the wheel of life. The property shrank as well, with a modest but comfortable old house sold to satiate the Burrows. Okay, some spelling mistake might. Gold and silver gold exchanged for the basic comforts of food, shelter, and clothing. All was gone, but for the small patch of land, with a little hut of mud walls and straw. This was at the end of the village, with paddy, wheat, sugarcane crops surrounding their 1 acre of land. They grew chilies, tomatoes, cucumbers, and other vegetables. They glided from the hut to the new tree in the yard. This was its favorite spot, for it offered a sense of relief from the pain of the poverty of its family, as well as remembered it of the glory it had basked in its life. The people called Chakravarma the name the air had taken before, the divine sculptor from heaven, and some even called him the incarnation of the heavenly sculptor, Vishwakarma himself. Under the neem tree, the bronze sculpture of the Lord of Death, seated on the buffalo with noose gripped tightly in his right hand, and the hellish dogs licking at his feet, reflected the light of the dawn, as if the Lord himself was glowing. It was the finest of sculptures he had ever made, and rendered him dear to the Lord of the Death, to the extent of granting the sculptor a chance to teach his young son the secrets of sculpting. Yeah.
Okay, Sri Charan, what do you think? What do you think when you read it? What do you think are the strengths, and then maybe talk about what you think might be some of the weaknesses of this piece?
Okay, so I so I liked it writing the descriptions actually of the house and the atmosphere here. I thought maybe there might be a little too, I mean, subjective rather than objective, but I liked writing them here. And and initially, I thought the writing in the age point of view was a great idea, but as it continued, I thought this was going somewhere. As in, I faced some difficulties actually from shifting the age POV to the human's POV, the the actual human it had been before. So my plan was first to write the POV of that person, the ghost POV essentially, the actual person's POV. But then I thought the age POV might be a little different, and I continued with it. But then I faced some difficulties transitioning to that. So that is one difficulty I faced. And
okay,
yeah,
does anyone else have a comment? Abhinav, Ram, I'm not sure who else is here right at the moment.
No,
I'm not sure that I see everyone. Arun.
Hey, Otis.
Hey.
No, I don't have I don't have a piece today. I just came to listen.
Oh yeah, fine. Did you have any feeling hearing Sri Charan's piece?
I thought it was interesting, but there were a couple of places where I felt so the air. So it's almost like the air is a living thing which seems to have its own feeling. That's what I got.
Yeah, it's personified. The air is personified.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one place where I felt a little, there was some incongruity for me was where it says, let me see, can you go back to the first page?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says, the last paragraph, it says, the air bathed in the light too, as it washed off the dust, stench, and silence of the night. Song of the Nightingale, it recognized the faint, the very slight greenish breath of the newborn leaves. I found that very interesting. I mean, what's the greenish breath of the, so is the air quote unquote, seeing the leaves in its own fashion, right? So while we would see the greenish tinge of the leaf, the air is smelling the greenish breath of the leaf. So I found that fascinating.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that there's a number of interesting things. Well, while we're just looking at this first page, I think it becomes. So this is wild, Sri Charan. I mean, you do these things that are just pretty wild. I did wonder if in Hinduism is air a personified god, or is this?
Yeah, I mean, in Hinduism, yes, air is a personified god. Like we call him Vayu.
Yeah, so I think I think it's extremely interesting to draw upon that. I mean, even if you weren't drawing upon that, to personify air, I think is an interesting idea, but to personify it with the sense that there's a tradition of personifying the air, I think is really fascinating. And partially because we don't tend to personify things of such ubiquity and invisibility, right? I mean, particularly if we think about, we might understand, intellectually that air has substance, but in our lives, it's simply ubiquitous and invisible, right? I mean, it's a fascinating thing that you've done here. I think it's slightly diminished by also personifying the rays of light, so it just complicates it. I would just stick to one. I don't. Maybe I'll put it to the group. I think the problem here for me.
I didn't mean to personify it, but while writing, I think it came like.
Yeah, because you're dealing with the problem of this. You're dealing with this personification problem throughout this entire piece, and like, how does the air? I think Arun makes a nice comment. Like, you're thinking, how does the air see? And you're basically saying the air sees by smelling, in a sense, because the air the light is moving through it. That's what image is, and it smells the light, essentially. It's, or something like that. Who knows? I don't know. I only want to spend some time in your mind, not a lot of time there. That was a joke, Sritram. I enjoy it. I have some trouble finding my place because it's such an unusual point of view. Like if we're talking, like in Ram's work, I was saying, the Save the Cat is the way that, a reader identifies with the protagonist by seeing a common humanity, right? So we say that. So, but with the air, you can see that I have a problem with that because air doesn't have any skin in the game, right? It doesn't really have a stake. It's immortal. There are things about it that I don't share, and so it's hard for me to identify. Yeah. And there's no struggle. So those things aside, that makes it a lot of difficulty. When you move to the human beings, then of course we have people with skin in the game who are involved in struggle, and there's a stake. And so that's a whole different story. Air is different. I think that to me, you might have something, I don't know whether this is going to be useful in a piece, but you have something that verges more on like prose poetry. Are you familiar with prose poetry at all?
I heard the term, but I'm not really familiar or meant through those things. Like, I never read poetry.
Do you write poetry?
No, not that much. Not at all.
So to me, the difference between what would be considered a story and a poem is that a story would emphasize, these dramatic issues of protagonist and antagonist, basically. And we've talked about those ad nauseum. A poem might have that in it, but also might not. So it favors sort of some stylistic choices and some language choices over dramatic choices. That's what I would say is the difference. I mean, that's just off the top of my head. I hadn't thought about it. But basically, stories have dramatic purpose and poems have stylistic language purposes, right? And this, to me, because it doesn't have the dramatic, which would be part of having a protagonist and an antagonist, because the protagonist, the thing that's doing something here personified, can't have any antagonism. So then you don't have any drama. So I would...
Yeah, actually, just beyond this piece. So my intention was actually that the air was the soul of the dead father of that boy there. So that is what air is here. Air is meant to represent here, actually. This at the end of this piece, I slightly transitioned to that. I just said that, not hinted basically. So from there onwards, I'm just trying to get all these dramatic events involved.
Right.
What
I was getting that there was some dissonance, but again, it becomes very mind-blowing for me because we don't think with a kind of porousness about ubiquity and identity. You know, does that make sense? Like, you know, that which is ubiquitous, you know, something that is everywhere, is sort of the antithesis for us of something that's individualized and specific. So it seems, right? And you've written something in which those distinctions are sort of porous. You have the ubiquitous air, and then you also have this sort of more specified consciousness that exists within that air. And now I'm unable to locate it. I mean, we could have a conflict. Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking, is it because is it easier for a Hindu to understand it because we are used to thinking of the Vayu Bhagavan, which is, you know, the wind god. So it's not that it doesn't take our brain through convolutions to understand it, whereas a non-Hindu might struggle with that. Is that something to think of?
I think that could easily be the case. And I think we could have like a fascinating conversation about that because, yes, if you have a tradition, that's why I'm trying to bring up this porous nature. So yes, my tradition, right, is and what we're talking about here is a rhetorical tradition, I'll say, right? So my rhetorical tradition is very based in ideas coming out of Greek and then further sort of emphasized through Latin of the rhetorical concept of stasis. Stasis is the concept that things exist and have a location that's absolute in a sense. You know, so there's like, I am good. That makes me here. You are bad. So that stasis is the foundation of drama, because without stasis, right, it's that we locate, I'm the protagonist, you're the antagonist, diametrically opposed. That creates drama. That is, I think, very much embedded in the Western rhetorical tradition, because stasis is fundamental to the constructions of power in the Western world through the Western canon.
See, which is why when George Bush said you're either with us or against us, okay, to us that kind of binary thinking is not the Hindu tradition. Right?
Yeah, right.
In Hinduism, dharma is so you have a duty, but my duty as a husband could conflict with my duty as a son, could conflict with my duty as a father. And there's no right or wrong here. It's what I choose. And there are consequences for that. So in a sense, there is this fuzziness that's associated, which is very different from the Greek stasis that you're talking about.
Yeah. So we should probably have a different time when we can discuss these traditions and rhetoric, which I'd be fascinated. Of course, I don't know much about the construction of Sanskrit. I do know something about other indigenous languages from the United States, and have studied indigenous languages here. They're sometimes defined by, in comparison to the Greek, Roman, English rhetorical tradition, they're sometimes described as difficult. They're more vague. I don't like that term because it can sound pejorative. You could also think of that as being more open, right? So more interpretive, or with less stress for the need to interpret with some kind of exactitude, like the stasis that we're talking about in the Greek Roman tradition. So I think that that's a fascinating thing, and I think it bears out a little bit in this piece. And I was thinking, and why I asked about if there was a Hindu god, because I was even perceiving that there's a tradition here that is there's something that is allowing Sri Charan to investigate this very wild point of view that for me creates a little bit of dissonance between that ubiquitousness and also the specificity of the father's soul within that ubiquitous environment. And to me, where's the distinction? Where's the identity and non-identity within that? Fascinating. So take all of that into account and please write a prose poem in which that's the case here. I would love to see it. I think you're presented with some problems because of English and probably because of a little bit this mix of the Western mind, right, and the Hindu mind. I mean, I think to me it's a mind-blowing issue that you're bringing up in this short piece, and I would love to see it as a very stylized prose poem that for me it's not all of the right level. It just needs to be worked on so that it's all of the right level, right? And every sentence needs to be at that. I mean, this is true of our fiction too, but in our poetry even more so. Every sentence, not that it has to be overly stylized, but it has to be exactly right. We don't have room for even one word that's wrong. But bring it to that level, and then to me, when it drops down into this bronze sculpture here, the bronze sculpture of the Lord of Death, seated on the buffalo, with the newscript tightly in his right hand, and the hellish dogs licking at his feet, reflected the light of the dawn, as if the Lord himself was glowing. Please, Sri Charan, stop there. That is a powerful, Arun, please agree with me. The way this ubiquitous movement of this piece, and I hope maybe Sri Charan will share it with you and maybe others, but the way this ubiquitous movement of this piece suddenly localizes into this statue that so it's become so localized in that statue that's so exact, the hellish dogs licking, the reflected light of the dawn glowed as if the Lord himself was glowing. Is an unbelievable moment of language. Please, Sri Charan, I've begged you many times to dedicate yourself to finishing pieces, but I'm doing it again here. That is a fabulous line. This is I consider this a truism for us all. We write something, and if we get the ending, it doesn't matter what we've done here to get to it. If we get the ending, it's worth every effort to make sure that everything that comes before it goes right to that. Funnel everything right to that moment. That final, if you choose that as your final line, which I hope you will, and I insist, is fabulous. And you've created the context here for yourself to arrive at that line. It's wonderful. It's a real moment of creative inspiration to me. Now just make sure all of those things that you sort of gathered and you were working through in the beginning, right, Sritran? Right? You're working through that stuff. You're working with the perception of the air. You're working with moving through this space. You're working with the identity and these other things. But you worked with them. It's sort of like in the workshop and you've arrived at this line. Now just make sure that this work takes the reader through it perfectly and arrive there. It's a prose poem of 4 pages, 3 pages. It shouldn't be longer. I think it's really a fabulous work.
Can I just say one thing?
Not a story, but yeah, Arun.
Okay, so this is something interesting, right? When we're reading English passages, so my mind is so attuned to the English worldview when I'm reading an English passage that till you ask the question, in Hinduism, is there a god for air? I was I found it fascinating, but I'm thinking to myself, why is he saying this? Why is he saying this? And the minute you asked the question, it just clicked in my mind and everything else. It made sense. So I'm saying that even for us, sometimes we're so steeped in looking at the language and connecting it to the cultural context of that language that, so for example, I'll give you one example. In my book, all gods, so in English, except the Abrahamic God, which is a capital G, every other God is a lowercase g, right? In my book, every God, Hindu God, is a capital case G, is an uppercase. And what I'm saying is, when I sent it to the publisher, the editors sent it back with a note saying, why is it capitalized? It should be lowercase. And I said, no, there is an inherent bias in the English language against non-Abrahamic faiths. And in my book, I'm ensuring that that doesn't happen. And so the language dictates so much of how we think about it when we're reading that language, is what I'm trying to say.
How are God's names written? Does Sanskrit have capital and
No, we don't have any lowercase uppercase.
It's the same with the indigenous languages that I've studied here. I am really looking forward. I'm studying my Latin now because I'm a little bit of an anti-imperialist. So, knowing the language of imperialism helps me, and knowing the grammar, that it's not only the words, it's also the grammar that creates our thoughts. And so going back to like rhetoric, English rhetoric, if we think about the Greeks and the Romans, the grammar is a binary grammar. It's with a subject and an object. That's a binaryism. It's not only a binaryism, it's also a classism, right? So the subject is elevated over the object, it's differentiated first, but then we imagine it's also elevated, in some circumstances, or maybe, but regardless, it's a binary, it's a located binary, right? That is foundational, it seems to me, to drama. And so drama and the story and the ubiquitous story that we find in English and through Hollywood that exists everywhere now is a binary story and reflects binaryism. I'm very interested in how that could change.
Have you read the Mahabharata? Have you read the Mahabharata?
I really feel like I need to get a great translation, but how can I trust it? How can I trust? I need to come to India. Oh, this is what I was going to say. I'm so looking forward to coming to India at some point and learning Sanskrit so I can really understand.
Well, Abhinav's just written a book on the, with 67 stories of Mahabharata. But the point I'm trying to make is the Mahabharata, there are so many shades of gray. The characters, you can't say if he's good or bad, and there are so many characters like that. They have the shades of gray in between. So it's fascinating that when you're talking about binary, right? Binaries of good versus evil. There's less of that in the Mahabharata. It's all, everybody is working according to their own versions of dharma to do what they think is right, and then there are consequences.
Right. And I think that that's an aspect of polytheism that exists too. I mean, you can see that in the Greek, you can see that in the Greek. The Romans actually transitioned that somewhat, to it was the Romans who invented the god of justice, but it had its Egyptian, tradition too. But it's really interesting. If you would make a recommendation to me on the best translation of the Mahabharata to read, I would love to see that.
I'll send you a few recommendations in that case, Otis.
Abhinav is the expert.
You sent me the prose edition before, but I actually would prefer to read it if it can somehow reflect the Sanskrit however it can reflect the Sanskrit most closely is better for me. Because
I will send you an email with the links on that, Otis.
Okay, thank you. I think it is it is fascinating to me how language shapes our consciousness, and I'm personally invested. I'm personally invested in divesting myself of the consciousness that comes only from one limited perspective, which is the Greco-Roman perspective and that rhetoric, which has shaped the way I think. And then not only shaped the way I think, but also the way I behave, right? And the way I act in the world. And I don't like that, right? I want to do what I want to do. So.
By the way, I was in your neck of the woods about 3 weeks back. I was in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I was there only for a day, and yeah, it was just crazy. I was on business.
Uh-huh. Well, next time, let's meet in San Francisco and have dinner.
Yeah, if I come to the Bay Area, I'll certainly ping you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this wonderful conversation. Sri-Charan, I don't know if you bailed, but this is really really great work.
Said he had to. Okay. He had to drop off, and for some reason my webcam has now stopped working. So evidently, whatever problems Ram was having, they've been very neatly transferred to my computer.
It just shows the handsome people have enough.
I think it's interesting, this conversation, and sometimes I also think Arun and all Alpine, that in the U.S. we have a lot of creative writing workshops, and I'm actually recently reading this book called the Empire. What is it? The Workshops of Empire, and basically how the workshops were organized into the universities as a way to operate sort of during the Cold War as an anti-communist, influence over the intelligentsia. So it's interesting to me because the things that were established there about sort of the binaryism. So you have these focused and framed binaryisms in which the protagonist basically ascends or descends, and that's the story structure that I've learned.
What's the name again? Is it called Empire's Workshop by Greg Grandin?
Workshops of Empire by Eric Bennett.
Okay.
It's a little bit. It's a little bit difficult. The reading is. I would have my critiques, but I'm still interested in the content. And appreciate the work that's gone into it. But Arun, and I was going to say that it would be so interesting to think about, constructing a writing workshop in an Indian university that took on these ideas of the binary story structure and this sort of less binary, or I don't even have a good word to describe it, Hindu tradition. And I mean, and
fuzzy, I will fuzzy traditions.
But and then how to take that head on? It's sort of like, they are different worldviews, and what happens? How can you figure them out? Because it can seem like it's a battle of language. Like if English carries its sense of stasis within its grammar. Yeah. So how is that not destructive to the other point of view as English spreads?
And I think that Sri Charan's piece was actually very illustrative of that tension between the language and the structure of the language versus the structure of the thought.
Yes.
With the Hindu thought.
I know. That's what's so brilliant about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's keep thinking about it.
I think you should talk to Sai then. You met Sai, right? Sai Swarupa, or you've spoken to her?
Not positive.
No.
Yes, he
Okay.
has.
He has. Okay, because
Yeah,
she teaches in a university, so yeah, it might actually be useful to have that conversation with her.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to be a part of that seminar when we have it.
Okay, we'll mention it to Sai.
Okay. All right. See you all. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
you.
Otis. Bye.
Thank you.